Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nadia binti Muhammad Faisal, A1AA0405. So our group is going to analyze the current economic condition for Malaysia in the aspect of economic growth. So for the first part, I'm going to talk about introduction. Economic growth can be defined as the increase in the market value of goods and services produced by an economy over time. It is conventionally measured as the percent rate of increase in real gross domestic product, or known as GDP. Economic growth means a rise in real GDP, which means a rise in national income, national output, and total expenditure. In other words, economic growth should enable a rise in living standards and greater consumption of goods and services. Economic growth is particularly important, especially for the growth of a country. There are a few reasons why economic growth is really important to sustain the economy of a country, such as Malaysia. One of the reasons is reduction in poverty. Increase in national output means all the households can enjoy more goods and services. Certain countries with significant levels of poverty, economic growth can enable vastly improved living standards. Another reason of the importance of economic growth is to reduce unemployment. A stagnant economy leads to a higher rate of unemployment and the consequent social misery. Economic growth leads to a higher demand and firms are likely to increase employment. Last but not least, economic growth also helps to improve public services. A higher economic growth leads to a higher tax revenues. With a higher growth, incomes and profit, the government will receive more income tax, corporation tax, expenditure taxes, and with this, the government can then spend more on public services. Thank you. So we're going to the next part. So now I'll be talking about the background of the country. Since gaining independence in 1957, Malaysia successfully diversified its economy from one that was originally agriculture and commodity-based to one that now plays host and robust manufacturing and service sectors, which have propelled the country to become a leading exporter of electrical appliances, electronic parts and components. Malaysia is one of the most open economies in the world with a trade to GDP ratio averaging over 130% since 2010. Openness to trade and investment has been instrumental in employment creation and income growth, with about 40% of jobs in Malaysia linked to export activities. After the Asian financial crisis in 1997 until 1998, Malaysia's economy has been on an upward trajectory, averaging growth of 5.4% since 2010, and it's expected to achieve its transition from an upper middle income economy to a high income economy by 2024. However, the COVID-19, which is the coronavirus pandemic, has had a major economic impact on Malaysia, particularly on its vulnerable households. With less than 1% Malaysian households living in extreme poverty, the government's focus has shifted towards addressing the well-being of the poorest 40% of the population, which is the B40. This low-income group of people remains particularly vulnerable to economic shocks as well as the increases in the cost of living and mounting financial obligations. Malaysia's near-term economic outlooks will be more dependent than usual on government measures to sustain private sector activity, as the shock of COVID-19 reduces export, which will lead to an expansion. Over the longer term, as Malaysia converges with the high-income economies, incremental growth will depend less on factor accumulation and more on rising productivity to sustain higher potential growth. While significant, Malaysia's productivity growth over the past 25 years has been below that of several global and regional comparators. Ongoing reform efforts to tackle key structural constraints will be vital to support and sustain Malaysia's development path. According to the World Bank Human Capital Index, Malaysia ranked 55th out of 157 countries. To fully realize its human potential and fulfill the country's aspiration of achieving the high income and develop the country's status, Malaysia will need to advance further in education, health and nutrition, and social protection outcomes. Key priority areas include enhancing the quality of schooling to improve learning outcomes, rethinking nutritional interventions to reduce childhood stunting, and providing adequate social welfare protection for household investments in human capital formation. That's all from me. Thank you. So we're going to the next part.
Hi, Assalamualaikum and good morning. My name is Miza Sabrina binti Malik and my matrix number is A18A0261. I will continue with economic growth in past 10 years. Based on graph, we can see the GDP of 2010 is 255.02 USD billion, which is lower than 2011. In 2011, the GDP is 297.95 billion. This is because overall in supply side growth well in 2011 with the domestic oriented sectors. As we can see, the GDP increased by 14.78 USD billion from 3 to 3.28 USD billion in 2012 to 338.06 USD billion in 2013. During this time, the service sector added most job and distributing to 65% of the net job addition. The next 2 years, in 2015 and 2016, the GDP dropped to 301.35 USD billion and 301.26 USD billion. We consider the financial crisis, growing domestic vulnerabilities, and increasing strain to the global financial and foreign exchange market complicated policy as a reason of the GDP drop in these 2 years. After the GDP drop in 2015 and 16, the GDP showed improvement in 2017 and 18, which is in 2017 318.96 USD billion. This performance supported by a better growth in manufacturing and service as well as rebound in agriculture sector. Past year, which is in 2019, the GDP still increased to 370 USD billion, with service and manufacturing sector remain as a key driver of the supply side. Meanwhile, in first quarter in 2020, reflecting to negative impact from COVID-19 pandemic, Malaysia economic growth by 0.7%. This is the weakest pace of expansion since the third quarter of 2009.
Okay, hi. Now I will explain about the economic issues in Malaysia, which is COVID-19 revolution, falling in plantations production, the rising cost of living, and the decreasing of trade. Okay, so for the COVID-19 revolution, impact the people to be creative on economy, since the movement control order, which is MCO, will make people to keep stay at home. This phenomenon put us to experience living in a digital economy to move fast forward. However, this disease impacts the most to the global market, especially business, since they need to pay their monthly expenses. Some business start to fail due to the increase of inventories, downward trend of sales, and the decreasing of earning in cash flow. So, moving to the next issues is the falling in plantations production. These issues usually will hit the most to smallholders. The falling of plantations production gave a big impact in Malaysia, which is the slowdown of demand from other country and the decreasing of export. Next, if the production of palm fruits sold keep falling, they need to deduct the labor costs and transport costs as to manage the overall cost. The production that continue of not gaining any profit may lead to the closing of production because not able to pay all the costs needed. Next, the rising cost of living. The rising cost of living have impact to people that have the slow wage of growth on their monthly salaries. income are the influencing decision to purchase things between needs and wants. We can see the rising starts from food price and will be followed by other properties since food are the largest contribution to overall increase in inflation and the cost of living. Okay, so the last issue is the decreasing of trade. The impact to the decreasing of trade will cause the imports of the capital and surplus trade will be declined. Export in Malaysia was impacted by the slowdown of semiconductor and the lower of commodity price, including in crude palm oil and crude oil. Other than that, export will get cheaper, then exchange of freight will fall depending on the cost of raw materials and productivity. And next, the disruptions in service also face the big impact to the transportation and logistic and need to pay more on domestic and international transaction costs. Next, I will pass it to my friends.
Hi, my name is Khadija Ali Ilmi. My matter is A18, A2, Alif Series 7. I want to present today economic policy. The COVID-19 revolution Malaysia has enforced on Movement Control Order MCO starting on 18 March 2020 to break the chain of COVID-19. The government are enacting the temporary trade measures that aim to reduce the exports of vital medical supplies and to replace imports and vital medical supplies. There are three ways to reduce trade deficit are: the first one is consume the less and save more. If the householder or the government expending less when importing goods for the other countries, the import rate will drop and there will be less active of borrowing from the other countries that will be needed to pay for consumption. The second one is deficit and exchange rate. The trade deficit deficits are typically driven by the significant real exchange rate depreciation. The third one is deflationary fiscal policy. They involve the higher tax and lower government expenditure. Higher cost living. The government is developed the living cost indicator additional to consumer price index CPI. The government was also evaluated and the new planning 500,000 young Malaysians to get jobs and through different programs. That's all. Thank you.
So, let's move on to the government or other respective institutions' role to sustain the economy. There are several roles they play to sustain the economy. The first one is the government needs to strengthen the quality of schooling to improve learning outcomes. Malaysia needs to advance further in education, health, nutrition, and social protection outcomes. So, the government needs to provide comfort to them by providing adequate social welfare protection for household, investment in human capital formation, and rethinking nutritional interventions to reduce childhood stunting. With all this, the government can create a glamorous and remarkable generation. Having this kind of generation, it can enhance the efficiency of the Malaysia government. The next role that the government needs to bear to sustain the economy is they should increase the income of the B40 worker. This is because the B40 worker needs to compete with the foreign workers, and this competition has kept their salary low. To increase the income, it can be achieved through reducing dependence on foreign workers, increase productivity, creating high income employment opportunity, and producing graduates who meet the needs of the industry. Plus, the B40 employee needs to take the opportunity to improve their skills in the job sector. They should be aware that various government policies has opened up the opportunity for skills training to ensure that they can find jobs and a fair wage in the future. Other than that, the government needs to encourage foreign investment in our country by providing incentives schemes for foreign investors. The government provides foreigner status to enable new foreign companies to enjoy tax exempt facility while extending the tax exemptions period for existing foreign companies. To increase foreign capital, the government should also ease the investment rules by allowing foreigners to own up to 100% equity in a project. This privilege will attract foreign investors to invest in Malaysia, so it can sustain the country's economic growth. Furthermore, to sustain the economic growth, the government should increase small and medium enterprise, which is SMEs. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, the government implements the Movement Control Order, which is MCO, to decide on the COVID-19 transmission network. Because of the MCO, the SME business is severely affected and needs government assistance. So the government gave an additional RM10 billion to ease the financial burden of small and medium enterprise SMEs. Besides ensuring that they benefit fully from all the previous aid. This is because SMEs is a major contributor to the Malaysian economy, which accounts for more than 2/3 of the country employment. In addition to almost 40% for the economy. Therefore, the government needs to ensure that the SME sector remains stable and resilient in the face of the current economic pressures and challenges, especially cash flow problems during the implementation of the MCO following the outbreak of the COVID-19 outbreak. Last but not least, the government generates economic growth in so many other ways. With all the role they play in order to sustain the economy, I believe our country not only can sustain the economy but also can improve economic growth. With all of this government and other respective institutions' role, I believe economic growth will remain strong. Next is conclusion. Malaysia is a developing country in the world and practice open country-oriented marketing. The country plays an important role in generating the economy through a macroeconomic planning. Economic growth also plays an important role to sustain the economy. One of them is economic growth can increase the national income, which means the national income is derived from exports, tax and profits from the business. However, declining economies will also affect economic growth, for instance, currency depreciation of the COVID-19 pandemic. In conclusion, it shows that how important economic growth to the country. In this report, we will know what happens to the country in the event of an economic downturn. We will also know that what action the country will take in the event of an economic downturn. So, the economic growth is very important to the well-being of nations.